you plan on living in Marietta, Georgia, there are a few things that we really need to discuss. Unfortunately, there are some things that nobody really talks about when it comes to living in Marietta, and one of those things is the fact that not all of the parts of Marietta are safe. In fact, according to a website called crimegrade.org, they have like a heat map of where the dangerous or safer parts of Marietta are, and Marietta is a very large city, and so this is not like a small town or whatever where it's like a super quiet kind of like community. This is a major city, and so there are certainly going to be some parts that have more crime and some parts that are much safer. And as a Marietta resident myself, I especially want you to understand where this website says the dangerous parts and the safe parts are. So if we take a look at this map, you can see like the southern part of Marietta, just south of like Marietta Square. This is where they have it rated like a red area, whatever that means. Of course, this is all kind of subjective, and you kind of get a lot of different crime ratings and certain opinions. You know, the more websites you look at, you're going to see that there are lots of different opinions. But for the most part, this southern part of Marietta is where they've got like the red area. And then when you look at the areas that are east of downtown Marietta or west of downtown Marietta, you can see that those areas are green. And so these are the areas that are considered East Cobb or West Cobb, and there are lots of families here. They are very safe areas, and so very different parts of Marietta, and what part you live in really is important. Obviously, you don't want to live in one of these red areas. These safer areas like East Cobb and West Cobb are really like the safest parts of Marietta. Now, keep in mind that this website is sponsored by like these security companies, and so naturally they're going to kind of make it seem a little worse than it really is. Again, I live in Marietta. I'm very familiar with this like southern part of Marietta, that little red area. It's really not that bad. I'm there regularly. I have no problem taking my wife and kids there. They're rating it a red, whatever that means, but it's really not that bad. My son plays like recreational baseball right around there. It's a super safe area, but I agree with the website that it is the less safe part of Marietta than East Cobb and West Cobb. What's up, y'all? My name is Victor with Atlanta Suburban Living. We put out videos every week about what it's like to live in Atlanta and the suburbs of Atlanta. As a Marietta resident, I really want to make sure that we convey exactly what's going on here in Marietta so that you understand the whole picture if you're planning on moving here. I have lived in Marietta for about 10 years now, and before I lived in Marietta, I've lived in the southern part of Metro Atlanta, cities like Fayetteville and Peachtree City and Noonan. And then when I got married about 10 to 11 years ago, I think my wife would be upset if I didn't know exactly how many years we've been married. I moved up here to the Marietta, Cobb County area, and so I've lived in all the different kind of parts of Marietta. The most southern part of Marietta, down by the Atlanta Braves Stadium. We have lived in West Cobb, we lived in East Cobb, and so Marietta is certainly my favorite suburb in all of Metro Atlanta. But there are some things about living here that nobody really talks about, or maybe people don't really quite understand, especially if you don't live here in Marietta, if you're not a resident of the city. Of course, it can be kind of hard to know like these super important, intimate parts of living here in Marietta, so that's what we're going to talk about. One of those things that we really need to discuss is the difference between East Cobb and West Cobb. I know there are lots of videos, or maybe there's people's opinions about how these two are very different, and here in Marietta in Cobb County, we kind of joke about East Cobb being better than West Cobb, or West Cobb being better than East Cobb. This is really more like an inside joke. The people who live here kind of talking trash about like the other side of the Marietta area. For the most part, they are the same. Again, as a resident of both, I have lived in both East Cobb and West Cobb. I can tell you that the two are very similar. They are both family-friendly areas with excellent public schools, the same amount of traffic, the same amount of economy. The vibe of the two is very, very similar. If I had to pick a difference of the two, I would say like the East Cobb area maybe has some older homes. It's a bit more expensive. The West Cobb area maybe has a bit newer homes, very small difference, and maybe is a bit more affordable. Again, very small difference. And so for the most part, these two are very similar. Another big difference between these different parts of Marietta is the school ratings. And so if we take a look at the website, greatschools.org, this is a great website for looking at the school ratings. Also niche.com is another good one. But the common opinion among all of these school rating websites is that the schools in East Cobb are the best out of the group, and then the schools in West Cobb are maybe just a hair below. Instead of being a 10 out of 10, they're a 9 out of 10, or instead of being an A+, they are an A in West Cobb, and so a very small difference. And then when we go to South Marietta, we're looking at a bit of a drop-off in these school ratings according to the websites. And so different parts of Marietta, as we're kind of starting to see here, and they are not all the same. Another thing we should talk about is about downtown Marietta. If you plan on moving to Marietta, or you just have any questions about what it's like to live here, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. I'm a local realtor here in the area. Even if you just have a question. Thank you so much to everybody who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. While the downtown part of Marietta is very easily walkable, and there are lots of great shops and restaurants, there's even a park there in the middle of like downtown Marietta, Marietta Square. There's a theater there as well, the Strand Theater. So lots of things to do there in downtown. What we really need to understand is that this is like the oldest part of the city. And so there is no new construction in downtown Marietta. There's nothing there built like in the last 5 to 10 years really. And so the majority of these homes and these commercial spaces are all decades old, if not century old. You know, some of it, obviously some of it goes back to the post-Civil War era. And so this is really where Marietta came about, was that reconstruction era of the Civil War. And so a lot of these buildings are like super old, and many of these homes are 50 to 100 years old within the downtown Marietta area. And so if you plan on buying a home in that area, you're looking at a home that is going to need a lot of maintenance. Now, there are some homes that are newer than 50 years. There are certainly some condos, especially very close to Marietta Square. They have a lot of condos that they have built in the last 10 to 20 years. And so that is certainly a great alternative, and that would provide easy walkability to the rest of the downtown area. Another one that no one really talks about is just how much the power lines that are above ground here affect like the view and the vibe of the city. I know in many parts of the country, it's normal for the cities or the counties or the state, I guess, to like bury the power lines in the ground. And so you don't necessarily see these power lines in some places, but here in Marietta, they actually have the power lines above ground. And so this is like kind of an eyesore when you're driving through the city or just in the city in general. A lot of the power lines are above ground, and so it just like fills the sky with power lines. And there is a very big difference in the way that a city feels when those power lines are above ground versus below ground. It may sound like a minor difference, but I mean, there's parts of Kennesaw that are, it neighbors Marietta, where the power lines are buried, and it looks so much nicer. Or Alpharetta is a perfect example. There are many parts in Alpharetta where the power lines are buried, and again, the vibe of that city is so much better because of that. But in Marietta, one of the older cities in Metro Atlanta, a lot of these power lines are above ground. And it's not just like one row of power lines. It's like row after, it's like decades of power lines can fill the sky with these power lines. And so it is kind of unsightly in some parts of the city. And then another big part of this aging of the city is that not only is the downtown Marietta area much older, but most of the homes in the Marietta area are older. There is some new construction, but we're really looking at a lot of 70s and 80s, maybe 90s homes in the city of Marietta. And while many of them have been renovated, some of them have not been renovated. And so you really got to be careful when you are buying or renting a home here in Marietta. You really want to be looking for a home that has had some kind of renovation, because when you're looking at a 50-year-old home, you obviously don't want to be doing regular regular maintenance on the home every week. Ideally, those things have been taken care of or changed or whatever. Ideally, you don't have a 50-year-old roof or a 50-year-old HVAC. And so this is certainly something to look out for when buying a home in Marietta. Of course, this is a regular part of what we do here on the channel, and with the real estate business, we make sure that we have the right home inspectors going out to the home to check on all of these things and bring them up to the seller if you plan on buying. And another one that not a lot of people really talk about is that the eastern part of Marietta, so like East Cobb, this is the most expensive part of Marietta. But as you go west, it becomes less expensive. So West Cobb is less expensive than East Cobb, but even within that West Cobb area, as you go west on Dallas Highway, you start to see that property values start to go down. Not in a bad way, they just become less expensive. And so there are parts of West Cobb, especially very close to Powder Springs, where you get a very similar, if not the same vibe as Marietta, but the homes don't cost as much. And this is because you're just farther away from the city, you're farther away from also Atlanta, you're farther away from the interstate, and so it may be a little more tricky to live in this area. But man, if you could live in like the super west part of Marietta and also working in Marietta so you have a shorter commute, living in that part of West Cobb would really allow you to have a much lower monthly payment for a mortgage or for rent. A big one that really not a lot of people talk about when it comes to Marietta is the downsides of living here. The fact is that every part of the country, every city, every state is going to have its good and its bad. No area, no city is perfect. And so you really want to know the whole picture when it comes to moving to any home, any city, any area. You want to make sure that you have the entire picture, the entire story. And so I've made a whole video outlining the pros and the cons of living in Marietta. You can check it out right here. I'll see you in the next one.